this is the problem with the older son in the prodigal son story.
Tell me, please.
He didn't believe the brother of the prodigal son sees that his father has thrown a huge maximal party for his youngest son. And it all of a sudden occurs to the older son, it's as if my father has been withholding something from me all these years.
I see.
Because he sees the party and he sees somehow, some way, he perceives a lack. He perceives a lack that isn't actually there. And it's not actually there because all along he's been with his father.
Right.
And so...
And he's perfectly satisfied as long as he stays himself in his own identity.
And there's no going... And so the prodigal son is both the one who rejects the compromise and accepts... He's the one that goes out, and one flat out just rejects, and he actually comes to the brink of.
Yes.
He's on the total brink of total despair and total rejection of God.
Yeah.
Total rejection of a gift.
Everything of value.
Of everything of value. Yeah. And in that moment, there's the replacement in which God actually steps in.
And it's not even authentic repentance. It's, I'm hungry, and this is not going to get better.
Right.
I'm going home, and I'm going to prepare a speech.
And that's why it's not important whether or not, oh, Jesus is coming to my house today, so I better clean up.
Yeah.
And so he's got to come over whether your house is clean or not.
Right.
And even if you say, oh, I'm going to go clean it before you come, even if you know beforehand that he's coming, and I'm going to go clean up, and you don't actually don't get a reprimand.
Of course.
And he doesn't wait outside; he actually just walks in. And in the moment he crosses over the threshold, it all changes.
Yes.
Because it had nothing to do with the cleaning up. It had nothing to do with the repentance.
It has to do with him transforming what is,
right? Whether
it was the cleaning up or the non-cleaning up.
Now, we need to clarify the fact that you have to have repentance. His act of repentance was him walking back.
Yes. Now, repentance just means turning away from a certain path.
Right. He turned away, so now he's walking back towards.
Yeah.
And at least in a certain sense, the prodigal son, the illustration of him running wasn't meant that the father left. It was that the son had actually left the father. And the simple turning back prompted the father to run as soon as he saw him in the distance.
Yes. The right motives weren't even a factor. It's just not being satisfied.
God didn't even look at the motives. It didn't matter the motives.
Yeah. It's not being satisfied with something that isn't satisfying.
And so the prodigal son recognized that. The older son had no clue.
Right.
And we don't know what happened afterwards. It's left up because that's us. Or most of us, or many of us. And that's left open-ended because it's our story. There's no name to either one of those. There's no name to the father, there's no name to the son, or the prodigal son, or the elder brother. Because we're one or both. In a sense.
Necessarily both, really.
Right, yeah, in more ways than not, we are both at the same time. Because all of a sudden, we see God winning over a soul, and we say, well, why didn't I get that?
Now, okay.
Or as if, and it was important to clarify that, as if he gave more, and he actually was holding something back from me. It's both. You can't, he gave more. It was, he gave more, and he held back from me. And the father just says, my son, everything I have is yours.
Yeah.
It was all there. So not, you knucklehead, why didn't you just see it right in front of you? It's all been there, wake up. But just, everything that I have is yours. Right. So there's never a matter of giving over, the act of giving over.
It's always been given.
It was always been given. There's actually never been a time where it hasn't been given.
Now why, this is fascinating. What distinguishes the two sons such that the elder son didn't go full tilt on pursuing his goal, which he was in touch with on some level, okay? Because as soon as he sees this scene...
He perceives a lack.
Yeah. As soon as he sees this scene, he owns up to the fact that the past was full of lack too. In other words, he never so much as gave me and my friends a goat.
He perceives, all of a sudden he feels naked. He's totally vulnerable. And that freaks him out, but not in the way that it should have freaked him out.
Okay.
It should have freaked him out in the sense that it freaks him out in such a way that he gets jealous. It could have woken him up, and this is what you're saying about the suspension of self-gift.
Yep.
The self-gift is suspended, and all he sees is himself. Had that moment the curtain went up on him, and he perceives the total gift that his father is giving to his son. There's actually rejoicing in the gift.
Yes.
Because the son already recognizes, even if he hadn't recognized it before, in the moment, he not only recognizes the lack of his brother and the total fulfilling of his brother, but he perceives also at the very same time his own sort of lack of intensity towards the gift.
Yeah.
And in the moment, he repents, he turns back and receives the gift all back at once, all over again.
So in other words, it could have been the good news to the older brother. News
because it means that he's redeemed too.
Yes. Now, everything I have is yours. That's the best news there is. The father can't say anything more than that.
It's the confirmation. It's him coming back in, him receiving, him coming in, and his father giving him a plate of food and a robe too.
Yes. Now, you said something interesting. You said he only sees himself.
That's all he sees.
Okay. Does it make sense to say that he only sees himself because he's not in himself as himself, rather he's outside of himself,
he's looking at all the externals.
Yeah.
Augustine's line is, I was within, or he was within, and I was without.
Now, why is he without?
Because he's searching for truth, but not the true, but not the true good and the beautiful. He's searching for advantage. He's searching for a way to one up, searching for a way to pride and an attainment of things.
Now, why can't he be in himself? It seems that the only reason is he does not believe in the possibility that he's loved.
He doesn't believe in the possibility that he's loved, and he doesn't believe in the possibility that there's anything that he can give. Because if he had something, then he could give. But he doesn't have either. He perceives that he doesn't have either.
Okay.
So how could he possibly give joy and rejoicing to his younger brother in confirmation of his father to his father for the generousness of his gift?
Yes.
If he doesn't recognize the fact that he's loved as well.
Yeah. And now, interestingly, if we were to say, what does the older son want? If he could have his vision of things exemplified here, what would that have looked like?
In terms of what was happening in the moment?
The situation.
Yeah.
What would the situation have been if the elder son...
Total rage.
But rage that affected what? In other words...
Rage that it was tunnel vision.
Yeah.
Literally a conjuring up of memories and perceived lacks all at once. It becomes a single moment in time where all that he sees is... He misses essentially everything in this one sort of moment where it's captured, where all he sees is lack. And Augustine talks about the fact that he sees evil as it's a deprivation of a due good.
Yeah.
So, in fact, evil in the sight of good doesn't exist.
Yeah. Now, intuitively, when I asked the question, I had just a sort of flash of what the answer would be. I didn't reason it out. I'd like you to comment on it. What it seemed to me that anger would affect is it would result in the elder son murdering both the father and the younger brother.
Absolutely.
Everyone dies. And the only thing that's left is the consciousness of the elder son with no contrast point to itself.
In many ways, it's a conjuring up of Cain and Abel.
Yes. Exactly. And therefore it's the same thing.
And it's all about it's unintended hubris, pride.
Where other people, as such, are the problem. Regardless of what they do.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that's why the saints are so extraordinary. Because the total disregard, it makes no sense. In many ways, I constantly hear on British radio, when they talk about Mother Teresa, they say, she was awful. She was like the incarnate devil.
In what sense?
Because she tortured people.
What do you mean? Specifics? Because
the way that she took care of the poor is perceived as a total violation.
Because of what phenomenon?
Because the phenomenon of total self-gift to another.
But why would it be perceived as violation? I just want to know the specifics.
Because it's the idea that someone could be a total self-gift to another. In other words, being totally going outside of yourself.
Okay.
Because you've already You are within, and he is within. He's already within.
Okay.
You recognize you're within. It allows you to go totally outwards.
Yes.
Towards another.
Okay.
And so, in the same way we talk about wrath, the wrath of God.
Yes.
That is such a wrathful thing to experience when it's the complete opposite for you.
In other words, when an outside observer sees this in action, it's such a contrast to the cocoon that they've made for themselves that it evokes rage.
Now, I don't believe, I could be wrong, Patrick, I don't believe an honest atheist would see that. Would you say?
Could you repeat?
My question is, if an honest atheist was confronted with the way that Mother Teresa, total self-giving to another.
I don't know enough about Mother Teresa to comment on that. But,
okay.
I mean, I would suppose that...
If you were to encounter, let's just say this, if you were to encounter someone on the street, pick what you would consider a slum, just total deprivation of in every way, in terms of physical, sort of, no food, just a dump.
Yeah.
Total dump. People are living in it. They're living in their own filth. And you see, amidst all of the pain, all of the cries, all of the sorrow, someone who is taking care of all these people in such a way that she's just comforting them. And she has no regard for herself. He or she has no regard for themselves. All they're doing is attending, and they're not doing anything extraordinary. In fact, many times, all they're doing is bringing them under a shack and cleaning up their wounds, giving the quilt off their back, and just comforting them. And then going off onto the next person. What would an honest atheist say to that in terms of, is that person really helping them?
Yes.
Yes.
Of course, for sure.
So, in that light, the people who reject that and see that as extremely an egregious violation
to themselves.
Well, they would never admit that.
What kind of rhetoric would one use? Can't even imagine.
That Mother Teresa was evil.
But on
the grounds that they didn't take care of the people.
It can't be that reasoning. I think there's something else.
There is more to it. There obviously is more to it, because what would happen is you'd listen to these interviews of like talking to some sort of Catholic, and they get very, very colorful with their language in talking about how they would describe Mother Teresa. People would describe her as a saint, all these things, and then they say, "Well, I totally disagree. This woman was a monster."
But not because she cared for the poor, but because there were other things that she stood for.
It didn't seem as if she was taking care of the poor to them.
Do you have any specifics? Because it just seems so...
I think we're getting off track. I'm not able to sort of articulate that.
Okay, fine.
But I think what we can move towards, though, is when we talk, going back to the desert.
Yes.
The people who are in the desert don't seem to other people who are in the gray, more specifically, to be, they're off the rocker, essentially.
Or at least not doing their work.
Yeah. And the only people that are able to perceive in any way, shape, or form anything, although it might look different or sound different or seem differently, because they're intuitive in the way that they see that it's not necessarily just about an act, a physical, tangible act, but it's an act of the will. And when I mean not just by will, I don't mean just like I can manifest it on my own, but it's actually a total unification.
Yeah.
So the act of the will is actually the act of God.
Yes.
It's perceived as extraordinary, the acting within the desert.
Say more about it's perceived as extraordinary.
The perceived as extraordinary could only be perceived as extraordinary from two people. And when I say perceived as extraordinary, I mean comprehending with the utmost gravity, understanding exactly what's going on here. So two kinds of people.
What kinds?
The honest atheist.
Yes.
And the truly honest Catholic, or the truly honest believer in God.
Yes.
So it doesn't have to be Catholic, but the truly honest believer in God.
Yeah. So honesty.
So the honest who, and when we say honest, we mean that a belief in a God who doesn't compromise.
Or foregoing belief in God, because it seems that if there is a God, he surely must have compromised with evil.
Right.
Evil. Yeah. I get it. That is really something. Now, the desert. You know a lot about at least the theory of the desert and the fruit of the desert and the model of evangelization from the standpoint of the desert. Does that ring a bell, first off? In other words, what does it mean to, for example, do self-gift to the world from this standpoint of being in the desert?
The total self-gift from the desert is such that it doesn't come in the form of an obvious action.
Yes.
It comes from the body, because God created the body as a form of a medium of God's love and God's creation. So the total willing of the good of the whole world towards everyone. Mm-hmm. And that in and of itself is the best form of evangelization, because that act of love is more powerful. When Therese talks about little acts of love, I always thought it meant picking up the pebble so someone doesn't trip on it.
Right.
But really what it means, so like a physical action of some kind, or something that you say. Mm-hmm. But if we can simply, for a moment, say, I love you, that has the greatest vessel for grace for that person and for yourself, than any outward action of any kind. Because the only way that grace can truly come about is through a total self-gift to another. And so these outward actions mean nothing if there's not a willing of the 100% of that 1% of that little thing that you can will. And so, again, even if that person annoys you, it isn't about, I have to sort of, kind of pretend to like them. Yes. Even if, for a moment, you say with total honesty with yourself, you don't even have to say it to the person. This is the most important part. It has nothing to do with an action, an outward action. It's all internal. Mm-hmm. And it can actually, the I love you can come in the form of a smile, if anything. Even at the very little, actually not even that, just as even a glance.
It need not even interact with the person.
It need not even interact with the person. And this is the point of the desert. It's all internal.
Yes.
And so, and the person doesn't even need to know about it in any way, shape, or form. I had a good, I said I love you in my brain today.
Right.
It actually, the action in and of itself is so efficacious to that person and you yourself, as well as everyone else around you. It creates unity.
Now, this is very important because it's not a particular kind of spirituality that we're talking about here. It's not that the desert is for some, but not all. Really, this is where it happens.
Yeah, and this is why, although I don't know how much he sort of understood this, but the former Holy Father Pope Benedict said that the new evangelization must have the patron saint of Saint Teresa of Avila, because he recognized that contemplative prayer, seeking contemplative prayer, desiring union with God, was for everyone, that all could seek it, and that for Benedict, that the transformation of the world had everything to do with being on one's knees.
Yes.
Literally and figuratively. That it was one in one's heart. That the unity of one's own heart would create unity for the world.
And okay, let's formulate this to make it as clear as possible, because it does not need to be murky. It can be rigorous. It seems very clear that what you're saying is that in that defenselessness, the dropping of mammon, where I don't have the silos full of grain, I don't even have a toolkit, I'm in the position of the prodigal son who knows he hasn't done the right thing, knows he can't really do the right thing. At best, he can just go where there's the next good step. Okay, that defenselessness and attentiveness to the fact that God is just and is there with us and for us, those two things, the looking to God and the refusal to take up my own tools to forge justice, but I love justice, but I know I can't make it. Those two things, a moment of that existing in somebody's heart, according to what you're saying, seems to be more effective in healing the world than a lifetime of service, of doing things that are not done in that. Now, that's... Yeah.
But it's reserved to a certain group of people.
Or is it? Because doing that attentiveness and the refusal to take up the tools of self-forged justice does not mean that I don't do beneficent service. It means that God shows me the way to serve. Now, some people may serve simply by praying, the cloistered. Some may serve through, God help us, politics. It doesn't matter. All right? It depends on what God says is the next good step, and whatever God says is the next good, he'll equip the person to do that.
And we don't mean and when we say this too, is that we don't necessarily mean, well, once you do it once, you're just going to do it all the time.
Right.
The trick is, again, because there isn't a formula here,
Mm-hmm.
all of the stones have to be knocked down. All of the structures have to be knocked down with this. Because
Yes.
if we experience it once, we say, see?
Now I've got
Well,
it.
what's amazing is that you would even recognize it in the first place.
Uh-huh.
The issue is not so much that you recognizing it, it's that you see that as a formula.
And what's
And
wrong
so-
with a formula? It becomes a defense. It becomes a silo full of grain.
And it becomes a defense, and what it does is that then it says, oh, well, we all have to attain this.
Yes.
And that's where it
Yes.
becomes offensive.
So it's continually emptying itself and being filled.
And being filled simultaneously. There's never a time where it's not full. It's never a time where it's always a time where it's full, and it's always a time where it's being emptied out.
My cup runneth over versus my cup is empty versus my cup is full but stagnant. Okay.
And I think what's key is that, oh, well, only certain people can attain contemplation. Well, that might be the case, and that's okay.
No, it's not the case.
Well, all right. Well, let me backtrack. We're all able to attain contemplation. It just doesn't look
Like contemplation.
like contemplation.
Right.
And because we have our own formula of what that looks like, that's where the problem lies. Because that's where the block is. Because we're missing the times we're in fact doing it, or the possibility could have been done had there been a total desert.
Say a little more. What is missed in what you just described?
If there's a formula, and we say, okay, well, Teresa of Avila had the formula, which means that the only way, St. Ignatius of Loyola had one way of doing things, but yet, that was only one step.
Yes.
Teresa of Avila has the next step, and Teresa of Avila is going to be the link between me and the union with God, because she could attain contemplation.
Yeah.
Which means that she's the only way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just by saying that, we're excluding the rest of the world.
Right.
And by excluding the rest of the world,
Destroyed the world.
you've destroyed the world, and and what
Ourselves.
we mean by that is that we've divided it.
Yes.
And so any division, which is any lack of good, of true good, any division is a block.
And it's diabolical.
And it's diabolical, and it just self-destructs.
Yeah.
And so it's totally painful to experience that.
And that's why division is an obstacle to the action of grace, because the action of grace is intrinsically unifying.
Yes.
That's
exactly.
why division is a problem, because it's not unified.
Hence the term union.
Yeah.
You don't attain union.
Right. What happens?
It's a total gift in the sense that there's just an infusion simultaneously with the experience of a desert. The desert, in a sense, becomes your union.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing else to be had. There's nothing else to divide. The desert is the union.
And it's not empty.
And it actually is not empty at all.
Yeah.
And the desert, the reason you can kind of fault the desert thing, because in a sense that what we're saying there is
Sounds empty.
It sounds empty when in fact it's full, but we actually almost have to say that to recognize the fact that the only way we can be fully in union is that there's a point in time where we're trying to get rid of the rest of that stuff that's actually dividing us. But once that last thing is wiped away, it's actually not empty.
It's maximally full.
It's now maximally full.
The emptiness is with reference to the self tools.
It's the self tools. It's the self it's the physical lack that we experience here on Earth because of our limited physical.
Yeah. Can't be into places at once.
Yeah, we're not fully integrated.
Yeah.
Because of sin.
Right.
So, but union affords us the ability to be unity for others, and it is not a turning inwards, because now I've achieved a nirvana of senses, where while that is actually a good thing, because it, in a sense, sort of achieved this unity, this transcendence. The issue is that it has to be efficacious for others.
Yes.
Because if we're all linked together, then my unity is not mine. It's not mine.
Right.
It's everyone's.
Yes, and it draws them forth.
It draws everyone together.
Hence the evangelism that can be completely silent.
You can be completely silent because the sign of my responsibility to my brother has nothing to do with the physical actions. It has everything to do with my desire to will the best thing for that person.
Which may exemplify itself in physical actions, if that's the grace.
And it can be, and it certainly is not a matter of sort of poo-pooing that. It can actually come out that way. But the important is not the action in and of itself. It's the total desire for self-gift towards that person, possibly exemplified in that gift. But it doesn't have to come in that way either.
I understand. Now, tell me what you feel about this. You were saying that if someone says, well, this is the way, St. Francis, no, this is the way, Teresa of Avila, this is the way, okay, going from one to the other, all these formulas. Could it be said that really each soul is its own universe of sorts, in the sense that the thing to be affected here is really a marriage between the soul and God? And that soul and God do not relate the same that any other soul in the history of creation has ever been. It's a unique relationship, and it is itself. So it's not that I have to do what Teresa did, and if I try, I'm necessarily not in myself relating to God. I'm trying to effect a...
You would fail.
Yeah. And it could be efficacious that I try that way so that I fail, so that I move forward in a different...
That you're given the tools to, in fact, create... If, in fact, we... even, in fact, no man is an island, and yet we all have our own place, there's a sort of a necessary autonomy there, where, although we're intimately linked with each other, we're also intimately with God, which would require a certain amount of autonomy from the other people.
But being ourselves, in other words, being in our own identity, if we're not in our own identity, we've forgotten that we're loved, and we've forgotten that it's about a marriage.
Right.
And it's only by it being about love and about marriage that we're drawn into union. If it's about doing the formula, we're not even engaged with another person. You know, it could be how to climb Mount Everest. It's the same thing. It's really just myself within myself, looking at myself from the outside. How am I doing?
And that's why we say the spirituality is there's, however many paths, or how many paths are there to God? As many paths as there are people.
Yes.
And that should be taken quite seriously, because the perceived lack in ourselves is looked at and says, oh, well, that person has something that I do not.
Oh,
that's really what also another thing that we can add to the way under the list of how we are very much like the elder son in the prodigal son story, because he thought that there was something lacking in him versus something that the elder son had, and he didn't.
Yeah.
Well, the trick is we all have it, and we're not being held back, which means that there isn't one best way. Your way is the best way for you. It's the only way for you, actually.
It's the only way that could have been.
It's the only way that could have ever been. It's the only way that it will be.
Yes.
Which means it's incumbent upon anyone who's a true believer to seek that unity such in a way that they're willing with every bit of their being, because they've already discovered the unity of themselves, to bring people along, not to themselves, but to God, so that they are, in fact, carving their own path to God.
So they are themselves with God, and it's good for them to be them with Him.
It's a true sign of sanctity to be someone that does that versus the other thing.
Yes.
Which is a cult.
Exactly.
The trick is, such as Padre Pio, as we were just discussing outside too, is that Padre Pio was so embarrassed and so pained by certain people's perception of his stigmata, for instance. And there was this sort of like let's go see like this phenomenon. And so he was creating this cult, and he was saying this high and mighty thing.
Yeah.
He was willing with all his love. The people were not able to respond in the same adequate way.
In other words, they were seemingly enabled by the phenomena that he couldn't help but exemplify.
Right.
To not be in themselves. They were disaffirmed in the very thing that he wanted to affirm.
Which is why, for as much as we look to saints and to sort of these examples, the same way that we compare ourselves to others, none of that actually matters.
Correct.
Because in the end, our best path to sanctity and to union with God is only the path that we can walk. And no other person can walk that for us. No other person can lead us on that way.
Yes.
And so they are examples to us only insofar as they encourage us on the way.
That there's somewhere to go.
That there's actually a place. There's something at the end of this.
If it were not so, would I have told you that I've gone to prepare a place for you?
Exactly.
Right.
And so, because the people who are sort of being this exemplaries for us never intended
to be a formula.
All they were concerned about was attaining unity with God and to share that unity with others.
Right.
And it was never an intention to bring them closer to them rather than God. It was only they were just trying to serve God. Yes. And they were just trying to do the best that they could. And so if they could glorify God in that way, then that was all that they wanted. And so because that's all they wanted, there was no externals. So there was nothing else to distract. But because we who seek the externals, we were looking at the externals rather than the inward heart. And if we looked at the inward heart of the person, what we would see was what they saw, which is desert, which is my cup overfloweth.
Right. All right, so continue.
Right, so we were talking about the paradox of the fact that the desert is the very thing that although seems as if your cup is empty, is quite full.
Maximally
full. And there's never a time where it's not empty, because it's always one's always being poured out, but it's always being filled at the same time.
So it's both full and empty.
Yeah.
Yes.
And really, I mean, we're actually really kind of bringing it full circle to the point about the new evangelization and Pope Benedict and Teresa of Avila, because he recognized that the cup can't be poured until it's actually filled. And the only way that it could be filled is if it was empty in the first place. But what we realize when we actually attain this desert, this emptiness, that we realize, oh, it actually wasn't empty. It was actually filled the whole time.
Yes.
And we sort of look up one day and we say, oh, it was actually there all along. I don't know how I got there. I don't know what it was. And this is, again, now that we're trying to go through this, this is the not trying to come up with a formula. This is not, okay, well, I gotta figure this out, the way that Teresa of Avila did it, or the way that Therese of Lisieux did it, the way that St. Francis did it, the way St. Ignatius of Loyola or St. Francis de Sales. Because what we realize then is that each individual path is capable of attaining this contemplation, this union.
Yes.
And that when one person attains this contemplation, this union, everyone is brought higher. And that's the key to the unity of one heart, creating unity for the rest.
Yes. And at the very least, it's because that person who has become empty, therefore full, is free to give themselves as a gift, rather than consumed with their own defense.
There are no motives. There are no extra motives.
So taking what you just said, a couple of things occurred to me. The act of pouring oneself out. You said that you can't pour the cup out until it's filled because there's nothing to pour out. And as you were speaking, it dawned on me that, well, there is no pouring out in this desert state because what's happening is the cup, being empty, is filled to overflowing. And that's the pouring out. There's no act of sacrifice in a sense. So that the person who is in this empty, full experience does not say, now I shall pour myself out. Rather, they are just themselves doing seemingly what is desirable. There isn't a conscious grinding, pulling and tearing sacrifice. Now I have to pour myself out. It doesn't happen. The cup is itself upright and it's poured into, and what is poured in pours out of its own accord. And that is very different than the idea of, well, here's the holy life. Here's the sacrificial life.
Right. And what it does too is you take the image of like being a cup and you're pouring water into it, through a faucet, let's say. The sacrificial life would be you fill the cup up. You may even overflow a little bit. You turn off the water and you leave and you go somewhere else. You drink a little bit of it. You put it down. You forget where you put it because you walked away. Then you finally come back to it, say, a day or two later, and you find that it's warm. You may even have a bug in it.
Yes.
So you need to pour it out, and then you need to fill it back up again. You may even have to clean it.
Hmm.
And you actually have to go back to the faucet.
Yeah.
And that faucet actually has to be turned on again for you to fill it up again.
Now, interestingly, as you're saying this, I'm having the experience of feeling, if I'm in that position, I'm feeling very abandoned.
Feeling tortured a little bit.
Yeah. Alone, and I'm not loved, because really, I'm not. I'm alone. I'm being neglected, and God is off doing something else. And I'm left to tend to things that I really don't have any idea how to make it work well.
Well, what I experienced this summer at my 8-day silent retreat in Omaha was, and it wasn't even an experience, it was just a knowledge that was actually impossible. That to say that the water was turned off would be to say that God stopped sending me grace.
Yes.
Which would be to say that God isn't pure act. Which would be to deny the very essence of God.
Right.
And if that being the case, in a very real way, it would be shown that the water is never turned off. The cup doesn't actually leave there.
Yeah.
Doesn't actually leave the faucet. Rather, the water actually just overflows, and it just stays there.
Yes.
And it overflows. And what that says is, one, obviously, God doesn't stop pouring His grace upon His children. Two, there isn't the act of, okay, I'm full, we pull away from the water, and now I'm far away from the grace, but I'm still actually called to act in the world, which would kind of classify what you're talking, kind of put to an image what you're saying about the sacrificial life in this negative sense.
Yes.
Versus the experience, or rather the truth of it, even if we don't necessarily experience it, the truth of the matter, that is actually kind of a delusion. That the real thing is that we actually never leave the faucet,
right,
and we're actually just overflowing. And so what that tells us is that this idea that we actually have to will our self-gift to others. Rather, there's a posture of self-gift. And for me, at least, that was so relieving, because it was like, oh, I actually don't have to do anything. Because my idea of evangelization, my idea of like teaching people about the faith was partly doing raw street evangelization. And that was abhorrent to me. It was painful. And not because it was painful for me, in the sense I didn't want to talk to people, although that was true. I didn't necessarily want to talk to people. But the reason why that was so painful, because it was the thinking of I actually had to leave the faucet.
Yes.
And that all of a sudden, that I would actually have to go back to the faucet, and I had to keep going back and forth, and I would just get worn out, and I would just be knocked out.
Now, this is very telling. As you're describing it, two things come to mind. One, there is a sense that is sort of pandemic of, all right, you've received from God by grace. Now it's time to give back. Go serve.
It's incumbent upon you to do so.
Yes.
Yes.
So you've received, and now it's time to give. Receive, then give. And that is not it.
And the image that I received actually was that it was not a cup image. I just had this image of me facing God. So it was kind of like I actually kind of was outside of myself, and I was looking at myself, and there was this like personified person of God. And what I saw was that, so it was like, looked like two people, but I knew the other person was God. And that, that really being an imperfect sort of explanation. But the point is that what I saw was that I was facing God all the time. I never turned my back. And not in the sense that I ever did that before, but that the turning was this going out.
Yes.
Okay, if you receive, now you go out.
And you're alone.
And you're alone. And that you have to do it on your own.
Yeah.
But what I then saw was that there was no turning. There was actually just facing God all the time.
Yes.
And that was true evangelization.
Because everything is taken care of in that one thing.
And the cup overfloweth.
Yes.
So the grace that you're receiving, naturally, you radiate the grace. You radiate that joy.
Yes.
Because, and the biggest part is, you kind of like, okay, you fill up the cup and then you take it away. And it's all about action, about you doing something. With this understanding, it's that we actually were in a mode of receptivity. And that there is no division.
Yes. Now, the second thing that was brought to mind is about this mode of receptivity. we mentioned God or mammon as the choice, the fundamental choice, if you can speak of it as choice, or rather two different modes. For my justice, for my security, I'm relying on God or mammon. And mammon in this case is not to be understood as money, but simply as a kind of self-security. Security through that posture or action or strategy or whatever that I can effect to bring about some semblance of protection for myself from a perceived or real threat. Now, God being our security entails that we have no dealings with forging our own security like that. We are, in a sense, vulnerable to the threat of evil, but because we are not taking up our own act of making justice for ourselves, God steps in and makes the justice for us, and therefore we're invulnerable in a very real way. Right. It can't touch us. Even if we're slain, we are perfectly safe. Now, it occurred to me to ask, well, what is this receptivity that disposes us to the cup overflowing, the emptiness which is the fullness, which is the evangelism that converts the whole world? And that choice, God or mammon, entails that if not mammon, therefore God. So all we have to do is forsake mammon. Since we cannot affect the right stance, we can't make ourselves receptive as such, we don't know where to begin. We just have to know that we're attached to our own self-protection. We're attached, and we can't even see it. We can't see the breadth of this or how deep it goes, and we're not going to get control over it, such as to be able to clean out the closet. We just have to know that we're very much... We can't conceive of it. Yeah. We know we have a problem, but we don't know what the problem looks like, or what the elements are, or how deep it goes. But we don't need to know, because we're not afraid. Why are we not afraid? Because it's God's business to deal with it. All we have to do is recognize we've got a sickness of forging our own justice, and we're dissatisfied with that. We want what He's giving, and we know that we can't let go of what we're doing. Try it. It's not going to work. You're going to be doing it 10 minutes from the time you resolve never to do it again. And you won't even know you're doing it. If you give up one, you'll be doing it in a different form. Yeah, it's not one thing. And you might not see it for 5 years. It's that subtle. Now, we don't have to see it. We don't have to keep an account. We don't have to get it right. We just have to know that we're doing it, and we don't like it, and we don't want to do it anymore, and refer that to Him, and then He'll break it down. He breaks it down. He'll show us the attachment. We'll see it. It's ugly, but it doesn't threaten us. Why? Because He's got it under control. I don't have to fix it. I just have to not love this thing. It's not those who do the mammon stance. It's those who love it. Because we can't help but do it until we are empowered to not do it. We can't stop doing it until we can do exactly what He does, which is to love without stint, without fear, because He's the one doing it in us. But we can't stop until we stop. And we're just enabled to stop. All of a sudden, oh, how did that get there? Well, He did it. He effected the victory in us. So all we have to do is realize, I've got this problem. It's very ugly. But it doesn't matter that it's ugly, because He's beautiful and powerful. And He's not bested by this, and it's not even really a problem. I can afford to be patient with myself because He's going as fast as He can, and it's not as if I'm willing that He stay away. There's just a natural resistance that I cannot shut off because my body and mind perceive this forsaking of my own self-forged justice as certain death. They can't understand what's going on.
And that's actually really that is actually the path to contemplation.
Tell me more about that, please.
Because the seeking of the desert involves just exactly what you're talking about. Being patient and just waiting for God to act. Knowing that what you see, and it's different than just saying, okay, well, I'm going to just do whatever the heck I want because I'm saved. Mm-hmm. Who cares? My actions don't matter. Rather, it's really not that at all. It's, I see these evil acts that I'm doing. I know that they are evil. I do not want to do them.
Yes.
I recognize And I have tried, and the reason why I can say that this isn't working is because I've tried, and nothing is working. And so I forsake the fact that I can't will this on my own, and that I wait for God to create the miracle in me to go from division to total unity.
And while you wait, you still do the best you can, knowing for sure that you're going to fail. You don't not do it because you know you're going to fail.
Yeah, and so the sort of encouragement here is there isn't a beginning plateau here. There's not like you were in the plains of Colorado, in eastern Colorado, and well, you can't really start until you're in the Mile High City. It doesn't matter where you start, as long as you start where you're at.
And wouldn't you have to?
And that's the only. And what you realize is that you couldn't. Oh well, I'm not going to see contemplation until I reach this point. But what you quickly realize is that actually doesn't work at all.
But isn't it interesting? Once you're where you're at, then you're in contemplation.
Right, because you know. I mean, that's the biggest thing. Is like if you know where you're at, and that means in saying that you know where you're at, what you are saying is, I know exactly who I am in the sight of God, regardless of my action.
Or rather, I don't even have to know who I am in the sight of God. I'm just not visualizing myself as other than what I in fact am. I'm not projecting something. So whatever's real, I'm okay with that. Because God is going to make it beautiful.
I acknowledge the way that I am, and I also acknowledge that God is greater than this.
Yes. And I will to be what He wants me to be. And as soon as I'm able to act in that, I'll act in it. And
in the meantime, I totally oppose the evil that's present.
Yes.
While totally allowing the Lord to act within me.
And as soon as we are in ourselves as ourselves, we are in the present moment, and that's where God is. And therefore, it's inevitable that there's contemplation, because we're with Him, and He doesn't fail to disclose Himself.
Yeah, the grace of the eternal moment.
Yeah.
And that's really how any of us can attain contemplation. I think, actually, in many ways, a lot of us just miss out on it. We actually skip over it, because it doesn't seem right. It seems counterintuitive.
Tell me what.
Because I have to do something. I have to actually do something to attain contemplation.
Or rather, I have to do something so as not to be a misshapen beast.
Monstrosity.
So when I look at myself, I see that I'm displeasing to myself. Therefore, I act in a reactive fashion to my own self-dissatisfaction to correct the ugly aspect. I react. Right? Therefore, I don't accept exactly what I am. I'm not saying I approve, but I'm not in myself. I'm without looking at myself. Okay? I'm on the outside, looking at myself, judging myself. Therefore, I'm not in the ugly. I'm the righteous judge, apart from the ugly, judging myself. I'm the essence of division. I've been cut in two. Now, if I'm to forsake the righteous stance of being my own judge and be the one who is the thing that is displeasing, and I'm okay with that, not because I'm okay with what is ugly, but because I know that anything but being in myself is far more vile, because I have the ugly and the division, and the self-righteous. I choose to be in myself, as I am, ugly, yet longing for beauty. In that place, that's where God is.
Exactly. He's there. He is exactly right there with me.
And it's therefore inevitable that we are in communication with Him.
And that we were never not in communication with Him. That He was actually always there.
Oh, he was always there. But we were in this...
We were without in Him.
Yeah. And who said that?
Augustine. Well, I switched it around, but it was... He was within and I was without.
Right, because He's there in us as we are. We have divorced ourselves from ourselves.
We forgot that we were actually made in His image and likeness.
Yes, and that we can't lose it because even though there has been a scarring, that has been accounted for in His wounds.
Right.
It's all His wounds now, and therefore He, though rendered ugly, He's still beautiful. So we in our ugliness, we are still beautiful in him, provided that we can be us.
And really, this is revolutionary for the world, because that recognition brings about a whole reordering of the earth, in the sense that when people begin to recognize this in themselves, we are linked in a long chain in which, if one person recognizes it, it will affect everyone else.
Yes. Inevitably.
And again, it isn't about leaving the sink.
And why does it affect everyone else? Because the person who has been healed, the person who has entered into the actuality of themselves, where Christ is, that person is now present as gift to the world. Whereas before, they were busy about many things.
And that now they've reached the point where they are at the feet of the Lord.
Yes.
But that in being at the feet of the Lord, they can actually be a light to the world.
Yes. Because it's the Lord's own light.
And so it's not a shutting out of the rest of the world. It's not avoiding the rest of the world.
No.
It's in fact quite the opposite. It's in fact, you are in fact lighting up the world.
Yes. You can't help it.
You can't help it, because you've attained you realize there's actually only one thing.
And you don't ever have to worry about losing it, or about, am I doing enough? Because he's the one that shows the next good step. He has an obligation to do that.
Or that somehow there's something that he's keeping from me.
What do you mean?
Well, if certainly, and maybe I'm just kind of rephrasing what you were just saying, but am I doing enough?
Mm-hmm.
That would imply that there's still something not given.
Yes.
And so, if there's still something not being given from you, that would imply that there's still something being held back from God, because you can't give what you don't have.
Mm-hmm.
Rather, he's giving it all at once, all the time.
Yes. And so, the same gift exemplified in a martyrdom, where the martyr is seemingly in an impossibly giving stance, such as to be the consolation of his persecutors. That's the same act for the martyr as simply getting out of bed in the morning. There isn't a greater in one than in the other, because it's just Christ. It's, this person has...
Well, it's the act of self-gift.
Yeah.
More than the martyrdom.
In other words, it's the same perfect gift. And it's only made apparent
through the martyrdom.
Yes.
The physical manifestation of this martyrdom.
It's not that, now is my big time. It's time to rally my resources. And no.
It's really the accidents of the essence. The essence being the union and the self-gift.
And God providing everything that's necessary to do what's needful in the moment, as the moment, and only in the moment as the moment. No surplus, no reserve, and only what is needed for the people that you're with, and no thought for anything more than that. And that takes care of everything. All of...
There's no need for a surplus.
Evil is defeated by that simple being of oneself with the Lord, simply. All evil is shattered, and there's no need to run around this place or that, fighting, because all the fighting is accomplished. And whatever the course is for the rest of our lives, that's up to God. We'll go wherever he goes.